The moment I walked into the courtroom. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a sterile scent that clawed at my throat as I stepped inside. My mother's stifled laugh hissed like a punctured tire, and my father's head shook slowly, his eyes fixed on the floor as if it held the answers I'd been chasing for months. I froze, my hand still gripping the heavy door, the weight of their reactions pinning me in place. The room was a blur of dark suits and murmured voices, but all I could see was my wife, Lena, seated at the defendant's table, her posture rigid, her hands folded too neatly, like she was posing for a portrait of someone innocent. I hadn't wanted to believe it. Not when I found the hotel receipt crumpled in her coat pocket, the date glaring up at me like an accusation. Our anniversary, when she'd claimed a late shift at the hospital. Not when her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. with a text from Dr. Ellis, a name I'd never heard her mention in 10 years of marriage. Not even when she started wearing perfume again, a sharp, unfamiliar scent that clung to her like a stranger's shadow. Each clue was a splinter under my skin, small enough to ignore, sharp enough to fester. "Mr. Carter, please take a seat," the bailiff said, his voice cutting through the haze. I shuffled to the front row, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor, every step echoing like a gavel in my skull. Lena didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed locked on the judge, her lips pressed into a thin line, but I could see the tremble in her fingers, the way they twitched against the table. Was it guilt? Fear? Or was she just playing the part? The first hint had come 6 months ago, at a dinner party with her colleagues. Dr. Ellis, Mark she'd called him then, had leaned too close, his hand brushing hers as he passed the wine. She'd laughed, a sound too bright, too forced, and I'd felt a prickle at the base of my neck. "Just a friend," she'd said later when I asked, her voice soft but edged with something I couldn't name. I'd nodded, swallowing the doubt, because love makes you stupid. Love makes you see a glance as a quirk, a late night as a sacrifice, a lie as a misunderstanding. The trial was for embezzlement, not infidelity, but the two felt intertwined, each betrayal feeding the other. Lena, the brilliant surgeon, had been accused of siphoning funds from the hospital's charity program. The evidence was damning. Bank records, forged signatures, emails to an offshore account. But I couldn't reconcile the woman I'd married with the one described in those cold, clinical documents. The woman who'd cried when our dog died, who'd stayed up all night to help me finish a presentation, who'd whispered forever in our vows. How could she steal? How could she lie? And if she could do that, what else had she hidden? The prosecutor stood, her heels clicking like a metronome. Dr. Lena Carter diverted over $200,000 meant for pediatric cancer patients, she began, her voice sharp enough to slice through the room's hum. She funneled it through a shell company, one tied to her associate, Dr. Mark Ellis. My stomach lurched. There it was. His name again, like a ghost that wouldn't stay buried. I glanced at Lena, searching for a flinch, a crack in her composure, but she was a statue, her face unreadable. My mother's hand grazed mine, her whisper barely audible. "I told you she was trouble." I'd ignored the warnings. My parents had never warmed to Lena. Her ambition, her intensity, the way she seemed to eclipse me in every room. "She's too perfect," my mother had said once, her voice laced with suspicion. I'd laughed it off, chalking it up to old-school protectiveness. But now, sitting here, I wondered if I'd been blind, not just to the money but to everything. The testimony dragged on, each witness painting a uglier picture. A nurse described Lena's late-night meetings with Mark, their hushed voices behind closed office doors. A financial analyst traced the funds to a Caribbean account, one Lena had access to. I kept waiting for her to fight back, to stand and scream that it was all a mistake, but she just sat there, her lawyer scribbling notes, her silence louder than any defense. At home, the signs had been quieter, softer, like cracks in a foundation you only notice when the house starts to tilt. She'd stopped asking about my day, her answers to my questions clipped and vague. "Works fine," she'd say, her eyes on her phone, her fingers dancing across the screen. I'd rationalized it, stress, long hours, the grind of saving lives. But then there was the night I woke to an empty bed, the clock glowing 3:14 a.m., and her car gone. She'd come back at dawn, claiming an emergency surgery, but her scrubs were clean, her hair still damp from a shower I hadn't heard her take. "Mr. Carter, do you need a moment?" The judge's voice snapped me back. My hands were trembling, my knuckles white against the bench. I shook my head, forcing a breath. The prosecutor called Mark Ellis to the stand, and the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest. He was taller than I remembered, his suit crisp, his smile practiced. He swore the oath with a steady voice, but his eyes darted to Lena, a flicker of something, regret? Defiance. Passing between them. Mark's testimony was a masterclass in evasion. He claimed ignorance of the funds, said Lena had handled the charity's finances alone. But then the prosecutor projected an email, one he'd sent to Lena. "Meet me at the usual place. We need to talk about the account." The date was our anniversary. My throat burned, bile rising as the pieces clicked into place. Not just money. Not just lies. I wanted to scream, to lunge across the room and demand answers, but my body wouldn't move. Doubt had kept me quiet for months. Doubt and love and the desperate hope that I was wrong. But now, with every eye in the courtroom on me, pity and judgment mingling in their stares, I felt the truth settle like a stone in my gut. Lena hadn't just betrayed the hospital. She'd betrayed me. The recess came like a lifeline. I stumbled into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air too thin to breathe. My mother followed, her hand on my shoulder, but I shrugged it off. "I need to talk to her," I said, my voice raw. The guard let me into the holding room where Lena waited, her eyes finally meeting mine. They were red, glassy, but not with tears. Something harder, something I didn't recognize. "Why?" The word tore out of me, jagged and useless. "The money, Mark, all of it, why?" She looked away, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started as a way to help the kids, to cut through the hospital's red tape. Mark, he understood. He was there. And I wasn't." My voice cracked, the hurt spilling out. 10 years, Lena. I gave you everything. You gave me your trust," she said, her eyes flashing with something like anger. "And I broke it. But you stopped seeing me, Tom. You stopped caring who I was outside of your perfect wife." Her words hit like a slap, but before I could respond, the guard called time. Back in the courtroom, the final blow came. The prosecutor played a voicemail Lena had left for Mark, her voice soft, intimate. "I can't do this anymore. Tom's starting to suspect. We need to end it." The room spun. She wasn't talking about the money. The verdict came fast, guilty. As the gavel fell, Lena turned to me, her lips parting as if to speak, but I was already standing, my parents' hands pulling me toward the door. Outside, the air was cold, the sky bruised with clouds. My mother's voice was soft. "You'll be okay, Tom." But I wasn't. I'd loved her, doubted her, hated her, and now I was left with nothing but the echo of her betrayal and the sickening realization that I'd never really known her at all.